Ma'am, I need you to step away from the merchandise and keep your hands visible. The security guard's voice cuts through the soft music of Nordstrom's jewelry department. Sarah Martinez freezes, her fingers still touching the delicate silver bracelet she'd been examining for her daughter's graduation gift. Two more guards appear from behind the cosmetics counter. Their radios crackle with static. The store manager hovers near the register, arms crossed, watching with poorly concealed satisfaction. "I'm sorry, is there a problem?" Sarah asks, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "I'm shopping for my daughter." "We've been monitoring your behavior," the first guard replies. "You've been acting suspiciously, concealing items." Sarah glances around the department. Other customers have stopped shopping, phones emerging from purses and pockets. She automatically notes the positions: 3 guards, 2 exit routes, security cameras at 11 and 2 o'clock. The manager's name tag reads Wilson. Badge numbers 247 and 156 on the uniforms. The employee handbook clearly states on page 47, "Visual surveillance protocols require reasonable suspicion of criminal activity before customer detention." But Sarah knows Wilson hasn't read that policy. Few managers do. "I understand your concerns," Sarah says, setting the bracelet carefully on the counter. "But I haven't concealed anything. My purse is here. My receipt for the perfume I bought an hour ago is right here." Wilson steps forward. "That's not how this works. We have procedures." Sarah almost smiles at the irony. Procedures. If only they knew how well she understood procedures. "Before we continue, I want you to see exactly how these situations really work when someone knows their rights." The crowd grows larger. A teenager starts live streaming. Wilson's confidence wavers slightly, but the guards move closer. Sarah takes a deep breath. She's handled situations like this before, just usually from the other side. The security guard reaches for his radio to call the police, and Sarah makes a decision that will change everything. 3 hours earlier, Sarah Martinez had been having the kind of Saturday morning she rarely enjoyed. No early calls from dispatch, no urgent meetings with city officials, no stack of incident reports waiting on her desk. Just coffee, sunshine streaming through her kitchen window, and the simple pleasure of planning her daughter's graduation celebration. "Maya gets her degree next week," she'd told her sister on the phone while getting dressed. 22 years old and already accepted to graduate school. "I want to find her something special. Something she'll treasure." Sarah had chosen her outfit carefully, not because she was trying to impress anyone, but because she'd learned long ago that presentation mattered in every interaction. Dark jeans, a crisp white blouse, leather jacket that had been a Christmas gift from Maya 2 years ago. Professional but approachable. Her mother's pearl earrings because Maya always said they brought out her eyes and made her look distinguished. The drive to Nordstrom had been peaceful. Saturday traffic was light for once, and she'd actually found parking on the first level of the garage. A minor miracle that felt like a good omen for the day ahead. Small victories, but Sarah had learned to appreciate them after years of dealing with much larger problems. Walking through the store's entrance, she'd noticed the typical weekend bustle. Young families with strollers navigating between displays, teenage couples browsing without buying, older women examining handbags with the serious attention of art critics evaluating a museum piece. Normal retail energy. Nothing that should have triggered concern. What she'd also noticed, because observation was as natural to her as breathing, was how the sales associate's smile had tightened slightly when she approached the jewelry counter. A subtle shift that most people would miss, but Sarah caught micro-expressions for a living. "Can I help you find something?" the woman had asked immediately, her tone pleasant, but distinctly watchful. "Just browsing for now, thank you," Sarah had replied, moving toward the display cases filled with glittering necklaces and bracelets. 2 minutes later, "Are you sure I can't help you with something specific?" 5 minutes after that, Is there a particular price range you're looking for today? Sarah had dealt with this dance before. The hovering, the repeated offers of help that weren't really offers but subtle pressure to either buy something quickly or move along to avoid suspicion. She'd maintained her composure, responding politely each time while mentally documenting the behavior. I'm taking my time. It's for someone very special to me. The associate, her name tag read Jennifer, Arungan, had nodded with forced understanding, but Sarah had caught her glancing toward the security desk, making deliberate eye contact with someone behind the cosmetics counter. Silent communication that suggested coordination. Other customers flowed freely through the department without similar attention. A white woman in expensive yoga attire examined earrings for 15 minutes without interruption, trying on multiple pairs while the staff smiled encouragingly. An elderly man studied luxury watches, even trying several on, while employees chatted with him about the intricate mechanics of Swiss movements and investment potential. Sarah had moved to the necklace section, immediately drawn to a delicate gold chain with a small infinity symbol pendant. Maya would love it. Understated but meaningful, sophisticated without being flashy. The price was reasonable, well within Sarah's budget for such an important milestone gift. "Excuse me," she'd said to Jennifer, "could I see this necklace, please?" Of course, but Jennifer's movements were careful, deliberate. She unlocked the case slowly, lifted the necklace with obvious reluctance. "Would you like to try it on?" "That would be helpful, thank you." As Jennifer fastened the chain around Sarah's neck, she'd felt the woman's hands trembling slightly. Nervous energy that Sarah recognized from hundreds of witness statements and incident reports over the years. The kind of tension that preceded either flight or confrontation. Fight or flight responses activated by perceived threat. "It's beautiful," Sarah had said, studying her reflection in the small mirror mounted on the counter. "My daughter would absolutely love this." "How old is your daughter?" Jennifer's question came with forced casualness, but Sarah detected genuine curiosity beneath the professional distance. 21. Graduating from college next week with honors. A genuine smile had crossed Jennifer's face then, the first authentic expression Sarah had seen. "That's wonderful. Congratulations. My son just finished his sophomore year at State." For a moment, the dynamic had shifted completely. Two mothers sharing pride in their children's accomplishments, finding common ground despite the artificial tension. Sarah had felt the suspicion ease, thinking maybe she'd misread the situation entirely. Then Jennifer's manager had appeared. Wilson was a thin woman in her 40s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a designer suit that probably cost more than most people made in a week. She'd approached with the kind of practiced smile that never reached the eyes, professional courtesy, masking obvious suspicion. "How are we doing over here?" she'd asked pleasantly, but her gaze was fixed entirely on Sarah, not Jennifer or the merchandise. "Just showing this lovely necklace," Jennifer had replied, her nervous energy returning immediately like a switch being flipped. Wilson had nodded approvingly, positioned herself where she could observe Sarah's every movement while maintaining the pretense of casual supervision. "Take your time," she'd said, but her body language communicated the exact opposite message. Sarah had removed the necklace carefully, handed it back to Jennifer with deliberate gentleness. "I'd like to look at a few more options before making my final decision." "Of course," Wilson had said smoothly. "Jennifer will be right here to assist you with anything you need." Translation: Jennifer will be right here to watch your every move. Sarah had moved to the bracelet section, drawn to a delicate silver piece with small, meaningful charms. A graduation cap, an open book, a star. Perfect symbols for Maya's academic achievement and bright future ahead. But as she'd examined the bracelet, she'd become increasingly aware of the growing surveillance network. Wilson whispering urgently to someone on her radio. A security guard appearing near the handbag section, trying to look casual while maintaining clear sight lines to the jewelry counter. Another guard positioning himself strategically near the store's main entrance, cutting off the most obvious exit route. Standard surveillance protocols, Sarah had noted automatically. Triangulated coverage, controlled exit points, coordinated radio communication between team members. Professional setup that would be appropriate for actual loss prevention, but completely inappropriate for a customer engaged in normal shopping behavior. She'd continued browsing, documenting everything in her mind out of pure habit. Chain of custody for observations, exact times, specific locations, witness positions, actions taken by all parties. The same mental process she used for incident reports and evidence preservation in her professional life. 25 minutes of perfectly normal shopping behavior. Examining merchandise carefully, asking appropriate questions, comparing prices between similar items. Nothing that would constitute reasonable suspicion under any legitimate store policy or legal standard. But the watchers had only multiplied. "Can I help you find something specific?" A different sales associate, the third to approach in half an hour. "Just looking. Thank you very much." Sarah had pulled out her phone to check the time and noticed she had 17 missed calls from work. Her stomach had dropped instantly. That many calls on a Saturday morning meant something serious was happening. She'd stepped away from the counter to listen to her voicemail in relative privacy. "Captain Martinez, we have a situation developing at the harbor. Multiple units responding. Need you here ASAP." Two more messages with increasing urgency from different supervisors. Sarah had closed her eyes, feeling her peaceful Saturday evaporating like morning mist. She'd need to leave soon, but first she was determined to buy Maya's graduation gift. She'd returned to the jewelry counter with renewed purpose, pointed decisively to the silver bracelet with the graduation charms. "I'd like to purchase this one, please." That's when Wilson had stepped forward, her expression shifting from suspicious observation to openly hostile confrontation. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the merchandise immediately." Sarah had felt the familiar chill that came with recognizing a situation about to spiral completely out of control. She'd glanced around quickly, automatically noting the positions of potential witnesses, the locations of security cameras, the available exits and their distances. Her professional training had kicked in automatically. Document everything, stay calm, know your rights, preserve evidence. She'd just never expected to need those skills while shopping for her daughter's graduation gift. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the merchandise and empty your purse on the counter." Wilson's voice had shifted from professional courtesy to barely concealed accusation. The transformation was so sudden that several nearby customers stopped their own shopping to stare. Sarah remained perfectly still, her hand still resting near the graduation bracelet. "I'm sorry, what exactly are you accusing me of?" "We've been watching you for 30 minutes, Wilson replied, moving closer. "You've been acting suspiciously, concealing items, clearly planning to steal. I'm authorized to detain you for shoplifting." The words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be taken back. Sarah felt the familiar surge of controlled anger that came with witnessing an abuse of authority, but her voice remained steady. "I understand your concerns, but you don't have legal authority to detain me or search my personal property without reasonable suspicion based on observed criminal activity." Wilson's eyes narrowed. "Don't lecture me about authority. This is private property, and we have the right to protect our merchandise." "Actually, you don't." Sarah's tone was patient but firm. Even on private property, detention requires probable cause. Suspicion alone isn't sufficient under state law. Jennifer, still hovering nearby, looked increasingly uncomfortable. Other sales associates had begun gathering at a respectful distance, sensing drama, but unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Wilson pulled out her radio. "Security to jewelry, code yellow, need immediate assistance." Within seconds, two guards appeared, the same ones Sarah had noticed positioning themselves earlier. The taller one, Badge number 247 approached with practiced authority. The shorter guard, number 156, looked nervous but determined. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to cooperate with store management," the tall guard announced. "Empty your purse and any shopping bags on the counter." Sarah shook her head slowly. "I decline to submit to an illegal search. I haven't concealed any merchandise. I haven't attempted to leave the store with unpaid items. And you have no evidence of criminal activity." "We don't need evidence," Wilson snapped. "We have reasonable suspicion." "Based on what specific observed behavior?" Sarah asked, pulling out her phone. "I'd like to document this interaction. What exactly did you see me do that constitutes suspicious activity?" The guards exchanged glances. The shorter one shifted his weight uncomfortably. "Put the phone away," the tall guard ordered. "You're interfering with a security investigation." "Recording in a public space is legal," Sarah replied, keeping the phone visible. "I'm requesting the specific behaviors that led to your suspicion. Timestamps would be helpful for your incident report." Wilson's face flushed red. "Don't tell us how to do our jobs. We know what we saw." "Then you should be able to articulate it clearly," Sarah said. "For the record." The crowd was growing. Teenagers with phones, older women whispering to each other, a few men who had stopped pretending to shop and were openly watching the confrontation. Sarah was acutely aware of the public nature of the situation, the potential for viral social media content, the way these situations could escalate rapidly. "I'm requesting to speak with your general manager and to file a formal complaint about this detention." "You'll speak with the police," Wilson shot back, pulling out her radio again. "Security to base, requesting police response to jewelry department. Uncooperative suspect refusing lawful commands." Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, but her expression remained calm. "I'd like the responding officers to know that I'm fully cooperative but declining to submit to an illegal search. I'm requesting their supervisor and asking that this interaction be recorded." The tall guard stepped closer, trying to use his physical presence for intimidation. "Ma'am, last chance to make this easy on yourself." "I understand you're following what you believe are proper procedures," Sarah said, making sure her voice carried to the growing crowd of witnesses. "But detention without probable cause violates the Fourth Amendment. Any evidence obtained would be inadmissible." Jennifer looked startled. "How does she know all that?" Wilson shot her a sharp look. "Probably looked it up online. These people always think they're lawyers." The phrase hit the air like a slap. Several witnesses gasped audibly. Sarah felt the familiar burn of racial coding disguised as casual observation, but she maintained her composure. "I'm exercising my constitutional rights and requesting proper documentation of this detention." Police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sarah automatically noted the response time, less than 6 minutes from the call. Either they were already nearby, or this was being treated as a priority dispatch. "I want to be clear for all witnesses," Sarah announced, raising her voice slightly so the crowd could hear. "I have not concealed any merchandise. I have not attempted to leave the store with unpaid items. And I have fully cooperated with all lawful requests." The tall guard moved to her left side while his partner moved right. Classic positioning for crowd control and potential restraint. Sarah noted their movements without appearing to pay attention. 2 uniformed officers entered through the main store entrance, their presence immediately changing the energy of the confrontation. The crowd shuffled nervously. Some people started putting away their phones, others began recording more openly. Officer Johnson arrived first, young, probably mid-20s, with the eager energy of someone still proving himself. His partner, Officer Williams, was older, more seasoned, approaching with the careful observation of someone who had handled hundreds of these calls. "What's the situation here?" Williams asked, his tone professional but neutral. Wilson immediately launched into her narrative. "This woman has been acting suspiciously for over 30 minutes, concealing merchandise, refusing to cooperate with security protocols. We have reasonable suspicion of shoplifting." Williams turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, what's your side of this?" "I've been shopping normally for my daughter's graduation gift. I've made no attempt to conceal anything or leave the store with unpaid merchandise. I'm declining to submit to an illegal search because no probable cause exists." Johnson stepped forward, hand resting casually on his radio. "Store security has the right to detain suspected shoplifters." "Only with probable cause," Sarah corrected. "I'm requesting that you review the security footage, which will show I engaged in normal shopping behavior throughout my visit." Williams studied Sarah carefully, his experienced eye taking in her demeanor, her articulate responses, her obvious familiarity with legal terminology. Something in his expression shifted slightly. "Ma'am, have you worked in law enforcement or legal fields?" Sarah hesitated for just a moment. The direct question was unexpected, and her answer could change everything. But she wasn't ready to reveal her identity yet. "I'm familiar with constitutional law," she replied carefully. "I'm requesting proper documentation of this detention and asking for your supervisor." Wilson grew more agitated. "She's being difficult on purpose. Just arrest her for interference and search her bag." "Interference with what?" Sarah asked. "I've answered every lawful question, provided identification when requested, and explained my presence here. Which specific law am I allegedly violating?" Johnson looked to his partner for guidance. Williams was clearly thinking through the legal implications, recognizing that Sarah's responses were too precise to be casual knowledge. The crowd pressed closer, phones openly recording now. Someone had started a live stream. Sarah could hear the commentary in the background. The situation was rapidly becoming very public. "Officer Williams," Sarah said, making direct eye contact, "I respectfully request that you review your department's policy on probable cause requirements before proceeding with any detention." Williams studied her for a long moment. When he spoke, his tone was notably more respectful. "Ma'am, would you be willing to show the contents of your purse voluntarily to resolve this matter?" "I decline," Sarah replied. "Not because I have anything to hide, but because consenting to an illegal search sets a dangerous precedent." Wilson exploded. "This is ridiculous. Just arrest her." The crowd murmured disapprovingly. Someone called out, "She hasn't done anything wrong." Another voice added, "This is racial profiling." Sarah felt the situation reaching a tipping point. Williams was clearly having second thoughts, but Johnson looked ready to follow Wilson's demands. The store manager was becoming increasingly frantic, and the crowd was growing more vocal. "Officers, I'm requesting that everything from this point forward be documented on your body cameras, including my full cooperation with all lawful orders." Williams nodded slowly, reaching up to activate his camera. "Recording initiated at 15:47 hours. Sarah looked directly into the camera. "For the record, my name is Sarah Martinez. I came here to shop for my daughter's graduation gift. I have not committed any crime, but I'm being detained without probable cause." The formality of her statement, the way she addressed the camera directly, the precise language, it all suggested someone very familiar with how these recordings would be reviewed later. Johnson frowned. "Why does she sound like she's giving testimony?" Williams was studying Sarah with increasing interest. "Ma'am, you seem very familiar with police procedures." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I believe every citizen should understand their rights." The answer was technically true, but both officers sensed there was more to the story. The crowd was growing restless, the store manager was demanding action, and Sarah remained calm in a way that suggested this wasn't her first encounter with law enforcement. "Officers, am I free to leave, or am I being detained? If detained, I'm requesting the specific articulable facts that constitute reasonable suspicion." The question forced their hand. Williams looked at Johnson, then at Wilson, then back at Sarah. The next decision would determine whether this incident ended quietly or exploded into something much bigger. "Officers, am I free to leave, or am I being detained?" The question hung in the air as phones continued recording. What none of them realized was that this moment was already being broadcast live to thousands of viewers across multiple social media platforms. 17-year-old Marcus Thompson had started his Instagram live stream the moment he saw security guards approaching a well-dressed black woman in the jewelry department. Within minutes, his followers were sharing the stream, and the hashtag #NordstromProiling began trending locally. "Y'all need to see this," Marcus whispered into his phone. "They got this lady surrounded for literally shopping. She ain't done nothing wrong." The comments section exploded with outrage and support. Users were already screen recording the interaction, uploading clips to TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. Each platform's algorithm quickly recognized the engagement and began pushing the content to wider audiences. Officer Williams hesitated, clearly recognizing that his next decision would be recorded and scrutinized by potentially thousands of people. The crowd had grown from curious shoppers to concerned witnesses, many now openly filming. "Ma'am, you're being detained for suspected shoplifting pending further investigation." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sarah nodded calmly, but her expression remained composed despite the gravity of what was happening. "I'm requesting your badge number and supervisor for the record." "Badge 774, Williams replied, his tone becoming more professional as he became aware of the digital audience. "Supervisor has been notified." Within the crowd, retired teacher Dorothy Chen was typing furiously on her phone, posting to the neighborhood Facebook group that had over 8,000 members. Her post included a photo and urgent call for witnesses. "Everyone at Nordstrom right now needs to see this," she typed. "Innocent woman being harassed by police for shopping while black. Store manager started it. This is happening right now in jewelry department." The post received 47 comments and 62 shares within the first 10 minutes. Local community activists who monitored social media for exactly these situations began receiving notifications from their networks. Maya Rodriguez, president of the Coalition for Justice, was in her car within 15 minutes of seeing the first video. She made rapid phone calls as she drove, activating a response network built over years of organizing. "We need people at Nordstrom now," she told her volunteer coordinators. "Peaceful presence. Document everything. Legal observers ready." The Reverend James Mitchell, whose church was only 12 blocks away, received 3 separate calls about the incident. He was conducting a community meeting about police accountability when someone burst in with a tablet showing the live stream. "This is what we've been preparing for," he announced to the room of 25 community leaders. "Real-time documentation of exactly the problems we've been discussing." Back in the store, Sarah remained focused on the immediate situation, unaware that her calm professionalism under pressure was inspiring thousands of viewers who saw her as a symbol of dignity in the face of injustice. A local news producer monitoring social media trends noticed the sudden spike in local engagement around police brutality hashtags. Within 20 minutes, field reporter Janet Williams was en route with a camera crew. The viral nature of the incident was becoming undeniable. Hashtag Nordstrom Profiling had been posted over 200 times in 30 minutes. Video clips were being shared on neighborhood apps, local community forums, and activist networks throughout the city. Sarah's sister Carmen was at her own daughter's soccer practice when her phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends were tagging her in posts about a woman who looked exactly like Sarah being arrested at Nordstrom. Carmen's hands shook as she tried calling Sarah's number, getting voicemail after 3 rings. She immediately began sharing the videos with Sarah's friends and family, asking if anyone had heard from her. The store manager Wilson was becoming increasingly agitated as she realized the scale of attention the incident was receiving. She could see customers openly recording, some providing running commentary about racial profiling and police overreach. "Everyone needs to disperse," Wilson announced to the crowd. "This is a private security matter." But the crowd wasn't dispersing. If anything, more people were arriving, drawn by the commotion and the social media buzz. Regular shoppers were putting down their merchandise and pulling out phones instead. College student Jessica Park had arrived to buy a birthday gift for her roommate when she saw the crowd. After watching for just 2 minutes, she began her own live stream on TikTok. "This is insane," she told her followers. "This woman is literally just standing there being super polite and professional, and they're treating her like a criminal. For what? Shopping?" Her stream attracted viewers from her campus, and word began spreading through university networks. Student activists who had been trained in legal observation techniques started making their way to the mall. The social media explosion was creating a feedback loop. More witnesses meant more videos, which meant more shares, which brought more people to the scene. The incident was transitioning from a private confrontation to a public spectacle. Marcus's Instagram Live viewer count had climbed to over 3,000 people. Comments were flooding in faster than he could read them, but the sentiment was overwhelmingly supportive of Sarah and critical of the store's actions. Local news outlets were beginning to pick up the story from social media. Assignment editors were dispatching crews, recognizing that this had the potential to become a significant story about retail profiling and police response. Sarah remained outwardly calm, but she was very aware of the growing crowd and digital attention. Her professional instincts told her that situations like this could escalate rapidly once they became public spectacles. "Officers, I'd like to resolve this matter as quickly as possible for everyone's safety," she said, gesturing subtly toward the crowd. Williams nodded, clearly thinking the same thing. Large crowds and tense situations were always unpredictable, especially when social media was amplifying every moment in real time. But the damage was already done. The story had taken on a life of its own, spreading through networks of activists, concerned citizens, and social media users who saw it as clear evidence of the systemic problems they'd been fighting against. Within 45 minutes of Marcus hitting Go Live, the incident had been viewed by over 10,000 people across multiple platforms. Sarah Martinez had become an unwitting symbol of dignity under pressure, though she had no idea that her composure was inspiring a movement. The question now was whether the growing attention would help resolve the situation peacefully or push it toward a much more dangerous confrontation. 30 miles away, Detective Ray Collins was finishing his lunch break when his phone buzzed with a text from his patrol partner. The message contained a video link and 3 words, "Isn't this Martinez?" Collins nearly choked on his sandwich as he watched the live stream. There was Sarah, standing calmly in Nordstrom while being detained by officers from a different precinct. Her composed demeanor, the way she spoke to the officers, her obvious familiarity with legal procedures, it was unmistakably their captain. "Oh shit," he muttered, immediately calling his sergeant. "Thompson here. Sarge, you need to see something. Martinez is in some kind of situation at Nordstrom. It's all over social media." The video had already reached the police department's internal networks. Officers on different shifts were sharing links through their private group chats, trying to figure out if it was really their commanding officer being treated like a common criminal. Sergeant Thompson pulled up the live stream on his computer, his expression growing more concerned with each passing second. "Jesus Christ, how long has this been going on?" "At least an hour. It's everywhere. Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Thousands of people watching." Thompson immediately called Lieutenant Davis, who was supposed to be Sarah's contact for weekend emergencies. The call went straight to voicemail. Davis was probably still dealing with the harbor situation that had caused all those missed calls on Sarah's phone. "We need to get someone down there," Thompson told Collins, "but quietly. If this gets out that we let our own captain get arrested while off duty, the implications were staggering. Internal Affairs would have a field day. The media would tear apart the department's credibility. Community relations, already strained, would suffer another devastating blow. Collins was already putting on his uniform. "What's the play, Sarge?" "Officially, we don't know anything yet. Unofficially, you're going to drive by that mall and assess the situation. Do not identify yourself as her colleague unless absolutely necessary." Meanwhile, at police headquarters, Captain Mike Rodriguez was reviewing incident reports when his phone rang. His wife was calling from her book club, her voice tight with concern. "Mike, the ladies are showing me this video. There's a woman being arrested at Nordstrom who looks exactly like your colleague Sarah. Is she working a case?" Rodriguez pulled up the live stream and felt his stomach drop. "That's definitely her, and she's definitely not working." The realization hit him like a punch. Sarah Martinez, one of the most respected captains in the department, was being publicly humiliated while shopping for her daughter's graduation gift. The woman who had led community policing initiatives, who had trained officers on de-escalation techniques, who had earned commendations for bridging gaps between police and residents. That woman was being treated like a criminal on live television. Rodriguez immediately called Chief Peterson's emergency line. "Chief, we have a problem. A big one." Back at Nordstrom, Sarah remained unaware that her colleagues were watching her ordeal unfold in real time. But she was acutely aware that her professional reputation, whatever that might be worth after today, was being broadcast to thousands of viewers. Every response she gave was being scrutinized not just by the officers in front of her, but by a digital audience that included people who might recognize her voice, her mannerisms, her obvious comfort with law enforcement procedures. "Officers, I'd like to point out for the record that I've been completely cooperative throughout this detention," she said, speaking clearly enough for the recording devices to capture every word. Officer Williams was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Something about Sarah's demeanor, her precise language, her obvious familiarity with police procedures, was making him question everything Wilson had told them. "Ma'am, can I ask what your professional background is?" The question sent a ripple of tension through Sarah. She could deflect again, but Williams was clearly intelligent enough to recognize that her responses weren't those of a typical civilian. "I work for the city," she replied carefully. It was technically true, though dramatically incomplete. Wilson stepped forward aggressively. "That doesn't matter. She's still a shoplifter." "Actually, it might matter quite a bit," Williams said, his tone sharper than before. He was studying Sarah with the careful attention of someone trying to place a familiar face. In the growing crowd, other city employees were beginning to recognize Sarah from community meetings, public safety forums, and neighborhood events. Whispers were starting among those who knew her by sight, but couldn't quite place where they'd seen her before. City Councilwoman Janet Torres was shopping 2 floors up when her aide called about the social media buzz. "Councilwoman, you need to get down to the jewelry department. The woman being arrested. I think she's the police captain who briefed us on the community policing initiative." Torres felt a chill of recognition as she watched the video on her aide's phone. She'd sat across a conference table from Sarah Martinez just 3 weeks ago, discussing police reform and community engagement strategies. The political implications were enormous. If a respected police captain could be racially profiled and falsely arrested while shopping, what did that say about the system they were all supposed to trust? Torres made her way toward the jewelry department, her mind racing through the potential consequences. The media attention alone would be damaging, but the deeper questions about institutional bias and equal treatment under the law could destabilize months of delicate community relations work. Sarah, still surrounded by officers and store security, was beginning to sense the shift in energy around her. People in the crowd were looking at her differently, not just with sympathy for someone being unfairly treated, but with the recognition that comes when you realize you're watching someone important being humiliated publicly. A woman in the crowd whispered to her companion, "I swear I've seen her at city council meetings. She gives presentations about police stuff." The whisper was just loud enough for Officer Williams to hear, and his expression changed immediately. He stepped closer to Sarah, lowering his voice. "Ma'am, Do you work in law enforcement? Sarah met his gaze steadily. The direct question was harder to deflect, especially with thousands of people watching her every response. But she wasn't ready to reveal her identity yet, not until she understood exactly how far this situation would go. I work closely with law enforcement in my position with the city, she said carefully. It was another technically accurate but incomplete answer, but Williams was clearly putting pieces together. The way she spoke to officers, her familiarity with procedures, her comfort level despite the pressure, it all suggested someone with significant experience in the criminal justice system. Collins arrived at the mall and immediately recognized the crowd size and media attention. He called Thompson from the parking lot. "Sarge, this is way bigger than we thought. News crews are setting up. There's got to be 200 people here, and if that's really Martinez being detained." "It is," Thompson confirmed grimly. "Chief's been notified. We're trying to figure out how to handle this without making it worse." The professional escalation was accelerating beyond anyone's control. Sarah's reputation, the department's credibility, and the community's trust were all hanging in the balance. While thousands of people watched her maintain her dignity under circumstances that would have broken most people. The question now was whether her colleagues could find a way to help without making the situation exponentially worse for everyone involved. Officer Williams radioed for his supervisor while studying Sarah with increasing unease. Something about her responses, her obvious comfort with legal terminology, was setting off alarm bells in his experienced mind. "Dispatch, this is Unit 774 requesting immediate supervisor response to Nordstrom Jewelry Department. We have a complex situation here." The radio crackled back immediately. "Copy 774. Sergeant Davis en route, ETA 8 minutes. Sarah nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Officer Williams. I appreciate you following proper protocols." Wilson looked furious at the delay. "This is ridiculous. Just arrest her and sort it out at the station." "Ma'am, that's not how this works," Williams replied, his tone growing sharper. "We need probable cause for arrest, not just accusations." Young Officer Johnson, eager to prove himself, stepped forward. "We have witness statements from store security about suspicious behavior." Sarah turned to face him directly. "Officer, I'd like those witness statements to be specific and documented. Who witnessed what behavior, at what time, and how did that behavior constitute evidence of criminal intent?" Johnson blinked, clearly unprepared for such a precise legal challenge. "Well," the store manager said. "Hearsay," Sarah interrupted gently. "You'll need first-hand witness statements with specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable person to believe a crime was committed." Williams was now openly staring at Sarah. Her language was too precise, too comfortable with legal standards to be casual knowledge. "Ma'am, are you an attorney?" "I'm not practicing law at the moment," Sarah replied carefully. "But I am exercising my constitutional rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments." The crowd was growing more vocal as the legal discussion continued. Someone called out, "She knows her rights." Another voice added, "They can't just arrest people for shopping." Wilson was becoming desperate. "Officers, I'm telling you she concealed merchandise. I saw it myself." Sarah immediately focused on the claim. "What specifically did you see me conceal? What item? At what time? Using what method of concealment?" Wilson hesitated. I saw her put something in her purse." "What item did you see me put in my purse? Can you describe it? What time did this occur? Were there other witnesses to this alleged action?" The store manager's confidence was crumbling under the precise questioning. "It happened fast. I didn't see exactly what—" "So you're alleging that I concealed an item you cannot identify, at a time you cannot specify, using a method you cannot describe, without any corroborating witnesses?" Officer Williams was taking notes now, his expression growing more troubled. False arrest was a serious liability for the department, especially when it was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers. Sergeant Davis arrived exactly 8 minutes later, his weathered face taking in the crowd, the cameras, and the obvious tension. He was a 25-year veteran who had seen enough situations to know when things were about to go very wrong. "What's the situation here, Williams?" "Sarge, we have a shoplifting complaint from store management, but the alleged victim is raising significant procedural questions about probable cause." Davis studied Sarah carefully. There was something familiar about her, though he couldn't place it immediately. "Ma'am, can you state your name for the record?" "Sarah Martinez," she replied clearly, making sure the recording devices caught every word. Davis frowned. The name was definitely familiar, but he couldn't place the context. "Ms. Martinez, are you represented by legal counsel?" "I haven't been formally charged with anything yet, Sergeant. Am I under arrest or am I free to leave?" The direct question forced Davis to make a decision. He looked at Wilson, then at Williams, then back at Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, you're being detained pending investigation of alleged shoplifting." Sarah nodded calmly. "In that case, I'm invoking my right to remain silent and requesting legal representation. I'm also requesting that this detention be documented with specific probable cause in your incident report." Davis's expression shifted to one of grudging respect. Most people became emotional or argumentative when detained. Sarah was handling the situation like someone with extensive experience in the criminal justice system. "Johnson, start the paperwork. Williams, secure the scene and collect any physical evidence." The mention of evidence highlighted a crucial problem. Wilson claimed Sarah had concealed merchandise, but no one could specify what item was allegedly stolen. The store's security cameras would show her shopping behavior, but proving criminal intent would be nearly impossible. Sarah was very aware of these evidentiary problems. "Sergeant, I'd like the record to reflect that no stolen merchandise has been recovered from my person or my belongings." "Noted," Davis replied, making a mark in his notebook. Wilson stepped forward desperately. "She must have hidden it somewhere or passed it to an accomplice." "Speculation," Sarah said simply, "not evidence." The legal scrutiny was attracting attention from people in the crowd with legal knowledge. A woman near the front was live streaming while providing commentary about Fourth Amendment protections and probable cause requirements. "This is exactly the kind of fishing expedition the Constitution prohibits," she told her viewers. "They're looking for evidence to justify a detention that never should have happened." City Councilwoman Torres had made her way through the crowd and was watching with growing alarm. She recognized Sarah now, the composed, professional police captain who had briefed the council on community policing initiatives. Seeing her treated this way was both personally offensive and politically explosive. Torres pulled out her phone and called the mayor's office. "We have a situation at Nordstrom that could blow up in our faces. The woman being detained. I think she's Police Captain Sarah Martinez." The mayor's chief of staff nearly dropped his phone. "Are you certain?" "Pretty sure, and there are news crews setting up outside. This is about to become a major story." Back in the jewelry department, Sergeant Davis was reviewing the incident paperwork with growing concern. The lack of specific evidence, the precise legal challenges from the alleged suspect, and the massive public attention were creating a perfect storm of liability. "Williams, what physical evidence do we have of criminal activity?" Williams consulted his notes. "Store manager alleges suspicious behavior and possible concealment of merchandise. No specific item identified. No witnesses to actual theft. No recovered stolen property." Davis looked at Sarah, who maintained her calm composure despite being surrounded by officers. "Ms. Martinez, in your opinion, do these facts support probable cause for arrest?" The question caught everyone off guard. Davis was essentially asking the alleged suspect to evaluate the legal sufficiency of the case against her. Sarah considered her response carefully. "Sergeant, I believe you and your officers are trying to do your jobs properly. But detention without articulable facts, constituting reasonable suspicion of criminal activity, violates established legal standards." Davis nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand that Sarah Martinez was not a typical shoplifting suspect. Her comfort with legal terminology, her professional demeanor under pressure, and her obvious familiarity with police procedures suggested someone with significant experience in law enforcement or the legal system. "Ms. Martinez, what is your professional background?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. The question was becoming harder to deflect, especially with news cameras now visible through the store windows and thousands of people watching her every response. "I work for the city in a position that requires extensive knowledge of constitutional law and police procedures." It was another carefully worded response that was technically accurate but incomplete. Davis was clearly trying to piece together exactly who he was dealing with, while Sarah remained committed to not revealing her identity until absolutely necessary. The legal escalation had reached a critical point. The detention was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. The evidence was virtually non-existent, and the public scrutiny was intense. Davis realized that his next decision would either resolve the situation professionally or create a legal and political nightmare that could destroy careers and damage the department's relationship with the community for years to come. Sergeant Davis was about to make his decision when Wilson's desperation reached a breaking point. The store manager, seeing her authority challenged and her credibility crumbling in front of hundreds of witnesses, made a catastrophic choice. "That's enough of this legal nonsense," Wilson snapped, lunging forward to grab Sarah's purse. "I'll find the stolen merchandise myself." The sudden physical aggression changed everything instantly. Sarah's reflexes, honed by years of training she couldn't reveal, kicked in automatically. She stepped back smoothly, her body positioning itself defensively without conscious thought. "Ma'am, do not touch my personal property," Sarah said, her voice remaining calm but carrying new authority. "That constitutes assault." Wilson, beyond rational thought, grabbed for the purse strap. "You people always play victim when you get caught." The racial slur, disguised as casual observation, sent a gasp through the crowd. Phones captured every word, every movement, as the situation deteriorated rapidly. Sarah maintained her grip on her purse while avoiding Wilson's increasingly frantic attempts to snatch it. Her movements were precise, controlled, the kind of defensive positioning that came from extensive training, but appeared to observers as natural athletic ability. "Officers, I'm being physically assaulted by store management," Sarah announced clearly for the recording devices. "I'm defending myself within legal parameters." Officer Johnson, eager to support what he perceived as store authority, stepped forward to assist Wilson. "Ma'am, release the bag and submit to search." "I do not consent to this search," Sarah replied, taking another step back while maintaining control of her belongings. "I'm being assaulted without legal justification." Johnson reached for Sarah's arm, intending to restrain her for Wilson's search. What happened next would be analyzed frame by frame in thousands of social media posts and news reports. Sarah's response was textbook perfect. A controlled, defensive move that redirected Johnson's momentum while maintaining her own balance. To the crowd, it looked like natural self-defense. To trained observers, it demonstrated skills far beyond civilian level. "She's resisting!" Johnson shouted, his voice carrying the panic of someone losing control of a situation. "I'm defending myself," Sarah corrected, her breathing controlled despite the physical confrontation. "Every action I'm taking is legal self-defense against unlawful assault." Sergeant Davis, horrified at how quickly things had deteriorated, tried to regain control. "Everyone, step back. Wilson, release the suspect's property immediately." But Wilson was beyond listening, her grip on the purse strap tightening as she tried to yank it away from Sarah. The physical struggle was awkward, undignified, and completely unnecessary. Exactly the kind of scene that would dominate news cycles and destroy careers. Sarah, maintaining her defensive position, used Wilson's own pulling motion to create distance between them. The movement was so smooth, so precisely executed, that it looked effortless, despite requiring significant skill to perform safely. "I'm not resisting lawful commands," Sarah announced for the cameras. "I'm defending myself against unlawful assault by store management." Officer Williams, watching with growing alarm, finally intervened. "Johnson, stand down. Wilson, release the bag immediately." The crowd was in an uproar now. Hundreds of phones captured every angle of the confrontation. Someone was providing live commentary. "They're literally assaulting this woman for shopping while black." Wilson, realizing her position was untenable, finally released the purse strap. But the damage was done. The physical altercation had been recorded from multiple angles and was already being shared across social media platforms. Sarah straightened her jacket and checked her belongings, her movements deliberate and professional. "I'd like all officers' badge numbers for my complaint documentation." Johnson, still agitated from the confrontation, made another critical error. He moved to grab Sarah's phone, apparently believing he could confiscate evidence of his own misconduct. "Officer, that device contains constitutionally protected material. You have no warrant or probable cause to seize it." But Johnson was past rational decision-making. He reached for the phone, and Sarah's defensive response was immediate and precisely calculated. She protected the device while avoiding his grasp, her movements fluid and controlled. The crowd erupted as Johnson stumbled backward, off balance from his own aggressive motion. To anyone watching, it appeared that Sarah had somehow caused a trained police officer to lose his footing through superior defensive skills. "She assaulted a police officer," Wilson screamed, seizing on the moment. "I protected legally owned property from unlawful seizure," Sarah corrected, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Officer Johnson lost his balance during an illegal attempt to confiscate my phone." Sergeant Davis had seen enough. The situation was spiraling completely out of control, with his officers appearing incompetent and the alleged suspect demonstrating remarkable composure under extreme pressure. "Everyone freeze!" Davis commanded. "Wilson, you're banned from this scene immediately. Johnson, step back and cool down." The physical confrontation had lasted less than 3 minutes, but the video footage would be analyzed for weeks. Sarah's defensive movements, her calm responses under pressure, and her obvious familiarity with both legal standards and physical confrontation techniques raised questions that no one was prepared to answer yet. "Sergeant Davis," Sarah said, addressing him directly, "I'd like to document the physical assault I just experienced and request medical attention to document any injuries." Davis nodded grimly. Standard procedure for any claim of police misconduct. But he was increasingly convinced that Sarah Martinez was far more than she appeared to be. In the crowd, people were making connections. "Did you see how she moved?" someone whispered. "That wasn't lucky, that was training." A security expert in the crowd was live streaming his own analysis. Those defensive techniques were textbook perfect. Whoever taught her knew what they were doing. The physical escalation had revealed something Sarah had tried to keep hidden: her obvious comfort with confrontational situations and her superior defensive skills. But she still hadn't revealed her identity, even as speculation grew about her background. "Officers, I'm requesting immediate supervisor response and documentation of this entire incident," Sarah announced. "Every violation of procedure, every use of excessive force, every civil rights violation." Davis was writing rapidly in his notebook. The incident had become a legal minefield, with potential lawsuits, internal affairs investigations, and media scrutiny that could destroy careers and damage the department's reputation for years. But as he watched Sarah calmly organize her belongings and check for injuries, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was handling this situation with the confidence of someone who had been on the other side of these encounters many times before. The physical confrontation was over, but the real reckoning was just beginning. The evidence was all on video, the witnesses were numerous, and Sarah Martinez had demonstrated that she was far more formidable than anyone had imagined. What nobody realized yet was that the woman they had just assaulted while trying to search her purse was about to become their worst nightmare, not as a victim, but as someone who understood exactly how to hold them accountable for every mistake they had made. Within 6 hours of the incident, Sarah Martinez had transformed from alleged shoplifting suspect to the most methodical complainant the police department had encountered in years. Her systematic approach to documentation would have impressed any attorney and terrified any officer who had cut corners during the arrest. From her kitchen table, surrounded by legal pads and her laptop, Sarah began the process she knew better than most people realized. The first step was always the same: establish an unbreakable chain of custody for evidence. Incident report request, case number to be assigned, she typed on the department's online portal. Formal complaint regarding Officers Johnson badge 749 and Williams badge 774, Sergeant Davis badge 312, occurring at Nordstrom, Jewelry Department, March 15th at approximately 15:30 hours. The language was precise, professional, exactly what any experienced investigator would expect from someone familiar with police procedures. But Sarah was careful not to reveal why her terminology was so accurate. Her phone buzzed with notifications. The social media storm was still raging, but Sarah ignored it for now. Evidence came first. Everything else was noise. She opened a new document and began typing her witness statement, organizing events chronologically with precise timestamps. Years of writing incident reports had taught her exactly what details mattered and how to present them clearly. At 15:32 hours, I was examining merchandise in the jewelry department when approached by store manager Wilson without probable cause. At 15:35 hours, Wilson made allegations of theft without specifying any stolen items or observing any criminal behavior. The next step required more delicate handling. Sarah needed body cam footage, security recordings, and dispatch logs, evidence that would require Freedom of Information Act requests submitted through proper legal channels. She pulled up the FOIA request forms, her fingers moving automatically through fields she had filled out countless times from the other side. Requesting officer, incident location, time frame, specific materials requested. The bureaucratic dance was as familiar as breathing. Request for all body cam footage from Officers Johnson, Williams, and Sergeant Davis during incident at Nordstrom on March 15th, between 15:15 and 16:45 hours. Request for all dispatch recordings related to shoplifting call at Nordstrom Jewelry Department. Request for all security camera footage from store management related to incident. Sarah paused, considering her next move. The FOIA requests would take days to process, but there were other avenues for immediate documentation. She opened her laptop's browser and navigated to the department's public records portal. The first receipt dropped exactly as she expected. The initial dispatch log was already available online, showing the timeline of events from the department's perspective. 15:41 hours. Dispatch receives shoplifting complaint from Nordstrom Security. Units 774 and 749 respond. 15:53 hours. Supervisor requested by Unit 774. 16:07 hours. Sergeant Davis arrives on scene. The timestamps were crucial evidence. They showed that officers had arrived within 12 minutes of the initial call, but had requested a supervisor only 22 minutes later, after the situation had already escalated beyond their control. Sarah's doorbell rang, interrupting her documentation process. Through the peephole, She saw a young woman with a press badge and a determined expression. "Ms. Martinez, I'm Rebecca Torres from Channel 7 News. I was hoping we could discuss what happened at Nordstrom today." Sarah opened the door partially, maintaining her composure despite the unexpected media attention. "I appreciate your interest, but I'm not making any statements at this time." Rebecca held up her phone showing the viral videos. "The footage shows you handled the situation with remarkable professionalism. A lot of people are asking about your background. I'm exercising my right to due process through proper legal channels," Sarah replied carefully. "Any statements will be made through official complaint procedures." The reporter's eyebrows raised slightly. Most civilians didn't speak in such precise legal terminology. "Are you represented by counsel?" "I'm representing myself at this time," Sarah said, which was technically accurate though incomplete. "Thank you for your interest." After closing the door, Sarah returned to her documentation with renewed focus. The media attention confirmed that this case would receive scrutiny far beyond a typical shoplifting complaint. Everything had to be perfect. Her laptop chimed with an email notification from the police department's Internal Affairs Division. That was unusually fast. Most IA responses took days or weeks. "Ms. Martinez, your complaint has been assigned case number IA-2024-0847. Investigator Lieutenant Morrison will contact you within 48 hours to schedule an interview. Please submit any supporting documentation through the secure portal." Sarah smiled grimly. Case number IA-2024-0847 would become very important before this was over. She carefully saved the email and created a new folder labeled with the case number. The second receipt appeared an hour later when her FOIA request for body cam footage received an immediate response. Another unusual development that suggested her complaint was being treated as high priority. "Your request for body cam footage from incident IA-2024-0847 has been expedited due to public interest. Footage will be available for review at police headquarters Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., by appointment only." Expedited processing typically took weeks. Getting a response within hours suggested that someone high up in the department was very concerned about this particular case. Sarah's legal training told her to be suspicious of such rapid responses. Either the department was trying to demonstrate transparency, or they were trying to control the narrative before it got out of hand. She called the number provided to schedule her appointment. The desk sergeant who answered sounded unusually deferential. "Ms. Martinez? Yes, we've been expecting your call. Would tomorrow at 10 a.m. work for your appointment?" Another red flag. Police departments didn't usually accommodate complainants' schedules so readily. Someone was treating her case with extraordinary priority. "That would be acceptable," Sarah replied. "I'll need to review all footage from the 3 officers involved, plus any additional units that responded." "Of course." Lieutenant Morrison specifically requested that all materials be made available for your review. Sarah hung up with growing certainty that the department knew more about her identity than they were letting on. The level of accommodation was far beyond standard procedure for civilian complaints. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister Carmen. "Are you okay? Maya saw the videos and is worried sick. Call me." Sarah stared at the message, realizing that her family was now being dragged into the public spectacle. The personal cost of this fight was mounting, but there was no backing down now. She returned to her documentation, opening a new spreadsheet to track all evidence and its chain of custody. Date acquired. Source: custody maintained by. Status of authentication: the same process she used for complex investigations. The third receipt arrived through an unexpected channel. A private investigator named Jake Morrison called, claiming to have been hired by concerned citizens to document police misconduct. "Ms. Martinez, I've been monitoring this case since the videos went viral. I have some information you might find useful." Sarah was immediately suspicious. What kind of information? Security footage from businesses near Nordstrom. Cameras that captured the incident from different angles. Audio recordings from inside the store. Would you be interested in reviewing these materials? The offer was tempting but dangerous. Evidence obtained through private investigation might not be admissible, and Sarah needed everything to be bulletproof for her complaint process. Any evidence should be turned over to the Internal Affairs investigation. I'm pursuing this through official channels. Morrison chuckled. Smart answer. You really do know how this works, don't you? Another hint that people were recognizing her expertise. Sarah deflected again. I believe in following proper procedures. Of course. But Ms. Martinez, you should know that the store's parent corporation has connections to some very powerful people. This might get complicated. The warning sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She hadn't considered the corporate implications beyond Nordstrom itself. If this case threatened larger business interests, the pressure to make it disappear would be enormous. Thank you for the information. Please submit any evidence through proper legal channels. After ending the call, Sarah researched Nordstrom's corporate structure on her laptop. The parent company had extensive real estate holdings, government contracts, and political connections throughout the state. The stakes were much higher than she had realized. Her doorbell rang again. This time it was a courier with an overnight delivery. The return address showed a law firm she didn't recognize. Inside the envelope was a letter offering to represent her pro bono, along with a check for $50,000 as a good faith settlement from an unnamed party. Sarah stared at the check, understanding immediately what it represented. Someone wanted this case to disappear quietly, before it could expose larger problems. The amount was significant enough to tempt most people, but not nearly enough to buy Sarah's silence. She photographed the letter and check, then locked them in her home safe. More evidence of attempts to interfere with her legitimate complaint process. The final receipt of the evening came through the official channels she trusted most. The district attorney's office had opened their own preliminary review of the incident, based on the viral video evidence and potential civil rights violations. Case DA 2024-1156, preliminary review initiated, regarding potential violations of civil rights under color of law. Complainant, Sarah Martinez. Reviewing attorney, Assistant DA Patricia Chen. Sarah recognized Chen's name from community meetings about police accountability. She was known for her aggressive prosecution of officer misconduct cases, which meant the DA's office was taking this seriously. She updated her evidence spreadsheet with the new case number and contact information. 3 separate investigations now. Internal Affairs, her personal civil complaint, and a potential criminal case by the DA's office. The breadcrumb trail was building exactly as she had planned. Each piece of evidence, properly documented and preserved through official channels, created an unbreakable chain of accountability. But as she prepared for bed, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that powerful forces were mobilizing against her. The unusually fast responses, the settlement offer, the warnings about corporate connections, all suggested that this case threatened interests much larger than a few officers and a store manager. She had spent her career fighting corruption and holding people accountable for abusing their authority. Now she was doing it from the other side, as a citizen demanding justice. The evidence was solid, the procedures were proper, and the documentation was meticulous. But Sarah knew that the real battle was just beginning, and she still hadn't revealed the one piece of information that would change everything. Her identity as Police Captain Sarah Martinez remained her secret weapon, held in reserve for the moment when it would have maximum impact on the investigation and the people who thought they could silence her with money and intimidation. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of gray overcast that seemed to match the tension building in the Internal Affairs conference room. Lieutenant Morrison had arranged the meeting for 9 a.m. sharp, with all parties required to attend: Sarah, the officers involved, their union representatives, and department supervisors. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, carrying a leather briefcase that contained 3 days' worth of meticulously organized evidence. She wore a navy blazer and pressed slacks, professional attire that commanded respect without being ostentatious. Officer Johnson sat across the table, his nervous energy obvious in the way he kept adjusting his tie. Officer Williams looked more composed but watchful. Sergeant Davis studied Sarah with the careful attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle he couldn't quite piece together. "Before we begin formal statements," Lieutenant Morrison announced, "I need to verify the identity of all parties for the record." Sarah opened her briefcase and withdrew a folder, placing it carefully on the conference table. The manila tab was labeled with her case number, IA 2024-0847. Morrison consulted his computer screen, cross-referencing the complaint filed 3 days earlier. His expression was neutral, professional, giving no hint of what he might have discovered during his preliminary investigation. "Officers Johnson, Williams, and Sergeant Davis, please state your full names and badge numbers for the record." Each officer complied, their voices steady despite the obvious tension in the room. The union representative, a seasoned attorney named Patricia Walsh, took notes but remained silent. Morrison turned to Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, please state your full name, address, and occupation for the record." Sarah met his gaze directly. She had been building toward this moment for 3 days, knowing that her identity would either strengthen her case immeasurably or create complications she couldn't predict. "My name is Sarah Elena Martinez. I reside at 479 Oak Street, apartment 2B. My occupation is—" She paused, glancing around the room at the faces watching her. Officer Johnson looked bored, probably expecting another routine civilian complaint. Williams seemed more attentive, still trying to place where he knew her from. Sergeant Davis was leaning forward slightly, his experienced instincts telling him something important was about to happen. Room tone. Complete silence filled the conference room. "My occupation is police captain, badge number 1247, currently assigned as precinct commander for Downtown Division, serving under Chief Peterson." The silence that followed was deafening. Officer Johnson's mouth actually fell open. Williams went pale, his hand instinctively moving toward where his hat would be if this were a formal inspection. Sergeant Davis closed his eyes and whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Patricia Walsh, the union representative, dropped her pen. The sound of it hitting the table seemed abnormally loud in the stunned quiet. Lieutenant Morrison, who had clearly known this information already, continued reading from his computer screen with practiced neutrality. "Captain Martinez has served with this department for 15 years, receiving commendations for community policing initiatives, de-escalation training, and excellence in constitutional law enforcement." Officer Johnson found his voice first, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Captain, you're one of us?" Sarah studied him calmly. "I was shopping for my daughter's graduation gift when your assumptions about my character led to my unlawful detention." The weight of what they had done was settling over the room like a suffocating blanket. They hadn't just falsely arrested a civilian, they had humiliated a fellow officer, a superior officer, while thousands of people watched. Williams was staring at his hands, clearly replaying every moment of their interaction. "Ma'am, we had no idea." The store manager said. "The store manager was wrong," Sarah replied firmly. "But your job isn't to accept accusations at face value. Your job is to investigate, to gather evidence, to protect constitutional rights, even when it's inconvenient." Sergeant Davis had recovered enough to speak, though his voice was strained. "Captain Martinez, why didn't you identify yourself at the scene?" Sarah had been expecting this question and had prepared her answer carefully. Because citizens shouldn't need to be police officers to receive fair treatment. Because my badge doesn't make me more deserving of constitutional protections than anyone else who shops at Nordstrom. The logic was unassailable, and Davis knew it. Every officer in the room understood that identifying herself would have ended the situation immediately. But it also would have proven that the system only worked properly when you were part of it. Morrison consulted another document on his desk. Captain Martinez, your service record shows extensive training in constitutional law, civil rights enforcement, and community policing. Is that correct? Yes. I've led training seminars for new recruits on Fourth Amendment protections and de-escalation techniques. Ironically, I've taught classes on how to avoid exactly the kind of situation that occurred at Nordstrom. Officer Johnson was now visibly sweating. The realization that he had ignored proper procedures while detaining the very person who taught those procedures to other officers was clearly overwhelming. Captain, we were just following store management's directions. No! Sarah cut him off, her voice carrying the authority she had kept hidden for 3 days. You were supposed to conduct an independent investigation based on observable facts and constitutional law. Instead, you allowed racial bias and assumptions to override your training. The union representative finally found her voice. Captain Martinez, with respect, this puts the department in a very difficult position. The publicity, the media attention. Sarah turned to face Walsh directly. The department put itself in this position when it failed to properly train officers to handle racial bias complaints. The media attention is a symptom, not the disease. Morrison cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the formal proceedings. Captain Martinez, you mentioned additional evidence in your initial complaint. Are you prepared to present that evidence now? Sarah opened her briefcase and began removing documents with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years building cases. Each piece of paper was labeled, dated, and cross-referenced. I have security camera footage from 3 different angles, showing my normal shopping behavior throughout the incident. I have witness statements from 7 civilians who observed the detention. I have recordings of the radio communications between store security and the responding officers. She placed each piece of evidence on the table with deliberate care. I also have documentation of the physical assault by store manager Wilson, the attempted illegal seizure of my personal property, and the violation of my Fourth Amendment rights by officers who should have known better. The evidence spread across the conference table like an indictment of everything that had gone wrong. Each document was professionally organized, legally sound, and damning in its thoroughness. Officer Williams finally looked up from his hands. Captain, how do we fix this? Sarah considered the question carefully. These officers had made serious mistakes, but they were also colleagues who would need to continue serving the community. The answer couldn't just be punitive, it had to be constructive. You fix it by acknowledging what went wrong, accepting responsibility for constitutional violations, and committing to better training. You fix it by understanding that every person you encounter deserves the same level of respect and professionalism, regardless of their race or apparent social status. The room fell silent again, as the implications of her words sank in. This wasn't just about one incident at a department store. It was about systemic problems that affected every interaction between police and the community they served. Morrison consulted his notes one final time. Captain Martinez, given your position within the department, how do you want to proceed with this complaint? Sarah had been thinking about this question for 3 days. Her answer would determine not just the fate of the officers involved, but the broader message sent to the community about accountability and justice. I want this case to be handled exactly like any other excessive force complaint, with complete transparency, full investigation, and appropriate consequences. My rank doesn't make me special. It makes me responsible for ensuring the system works fairly for everyone. The 70–75% reveal was complete. The woman they had humiliated, physically confronted, and dismissed as just another shoplifting suspect was actually one of their own commanding officers, someone with the authority, knowledge, and evidence to hold them fully accountable for every mistake they had made. The silence in the conference room stretched for nearly 30 seconds before the implications of Sarah's identity fully hit the officers involved. The casual arrogance that had carried them through 3 days of justifying their actions evaporated like morning mist. Officer Johnson was the first to crack. "Captain, Jesus Christ, I had no idea. If we'd known you were—" "If you'd known I was what?" Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the sharp edge of command authority she'd kept carefully hidden. "If you'd known I was human? If you'd known I deserved basic constitutional protections—" Johnson's face went red. The implication was clear. They would have treated her differently if they'd known her rank, which proved exactly the point she was making about systemic bias. Lieutenant Morrison opened his laptop and began accessing files that had been restricted during the preliminary investigation. "Now that identity has been established, I can share Captain Martinez's complete service record with all parties." The first document appeared on the conference room's wall monitor, displaying Sarah's official personnel file. 15 years of exemplary service, community commendations, advanced training certifications, and leadership roles in department reform initiatives. Officer Williams read the screen with growing horror. "Captain Martinez, you led the community policing workshop I attended last year. You taught us about constitutional stops and searches." Sarah nodded grimly. "I remember that workshop. We spent an entire day on Fourth Amendment protections and the importance of articulable, reasonable suspicion. Do you remember what I taught you about probable cause?" Williams swallowed hard. That detention requires specific, observable facts that would lead a reasonable person to believe a crime was being committed. "And did you observe any such facts during our encounter at Nordstrom?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Williams had no answer because there was no answer. They had violated every principle Sarah had taught them. Morrison pulled up the next document, Sarah's training records and specializations. The list was extensive and damning in its relevance to the current situation. Captain Martinez holds advanced certifications in constitutional law enforcement, racial bias recognition, de-escalation techniques, and community relations. She has led 73 training seminars for department personnel over the past 5 years. Sergeant Davis was reviewing the training records with growing dismay. "Captain, you personally trained half the officers in this precinct on exactly the procedures we violated." "Which makes the violations even more inexcusable," Sarah replied. "These weren't split-second decisions made under pressure. This was a prolonged detention with multiple opportunities to recognize and correct constitutional violations." The union representative was frantically taking notes, clearly recognizing that her client's position had become legally untenable. A civilian complaint was difficult enough to defend. A complaint from a ranking police officer with expert knowledge of proper procedures was nearly impossible. Morrison accessed the next level of evidence, internal documents that painted an even more damaging picture of the department's failure. Captain Martinez has filed 14 excessive force complaints on behalf of citizens over the past 3 years. She has also conducted internal investigations that resulted in discipline for 11 officers who violated constitutional protections. The irony was crushing. Sarah had spent years fighting to reform exactly the kind of behavior she had experienced at Nordstrom. Now she was experiencing it firsthand, while her own colleagues remained oblivious to her identity and qualifications. Patricia Walsh finally spoke up, her voice tight with professional concern. "Lieutenant Morrison, my clients were responding to a complaint from store management. They had no way of knowing. They had every way of knowing that their actions were constitutionally questionable," Sarah interrupted. "The training exists. The policies exist. The legal standards are clear. Ignorance isn't a defense when the education has been provided repeatedly. Morrison pulled up Sarah's personnel evaluations from the past 3 years. Each review praised her leadership in community relations and her expertise in constitutional law enforcement. Captain Martinez has received commendations from the mayor's office, the city council, and 3 community organizations for her work bridging gaps between police and minority communities. Officer Johnson looked physically ill. The woman he had handcuffed and dismissed as a typical shoplifting suspect was actually a decorated officer whose entire career focused on preventing exactly the kind of misconduct he had demonstrated. The final document appeared on screen, a list of Sarah's recent presentations to community groups about police accountability and citizen rights. 2 weeks before the Nordstrom incident, Captain Martinez gave a presentation to the Northside Community Center about citizens' rights during police encounters. The topic was, what to do when officers exceed their authority. The timing was almost too perfect to believe. Sarah had been teaching citizens how to protect themselves from police misconduct, only to become a victim of that same misconduct days later. Williams was shaking his head in disbelief. "Captain, why didn't you just tell us who you were? It would have ended everything immediately." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "Because that would have proven that the system only works for people with badges. Because every citizen deserves the protection I should have received. Because my rank shouldn't matter when constitutional rights are at stake." The logic was unassailable, and every officer in the room knew it. They also knew that their actions had been recorded, broadcast, and scrutinized by thousands of people who were now watching to see how the department would respond. Morrison consulted his final set of documents, the evidence Sarah had submitted through proper channels over the past 3 days. Captain Martinez has provided security footage from 4 different camera angles, witness statements from 9 civilians, recordings of radio communications, and documentation of physical assault by store management. He pulled up the security footage on the wall monitor. This video shows 47 minutes of completely normal shopping behavior, with no evidence of theft, concealment, or suspicious activity of any kind. The footage was damning. It showed Sarah browsing jewelry, examining items carefully, asking appropriate questions, and behaving exactly like any other customer making an important purchase. The footage also shows store security beginning surveillance of Captain Martinez within 90 seconds of her entering the jewelry department, before any behavior that could constitute reasonable suspicion. Officer Johnson watched himself on the security video, seeing his own actions from an objective perspective for the first time. The aggressive posturing, the failure to investigate independently, the obvious bias in accepting accusations without evidence. It was all there in high definition. The final piece of evidence was the most damaging. Audio recordings from inside the store that captured Wilson's racial comments and the officer's failure to correct obvious constitutional violations. Sarah's voice came through the conference room speakers, calm and professional, even under extreme duress. "I understand your concerns, but you don't have legal authority to detain me or search my personal property without reasonable suspicion based on observed criminal activity." The contrast was stark. While officers stumbled through improper procedures, Sarah provided textbook-perfect responses that any academy instructor would use as examples of proper civil rights knowledge. Patricia Walsh was reviewing her notes with obvious concern. "Lieutenant Morrison, given the circumstances, my clients would like to discuss possible resolution options." Morrison nodded grimly. "That's premature. We still need formal statements from all parties, review of department policies, and recommendations for disciplinary action." Sarah stood up, gathering her evidence back into her briefcase with methodical precision. "Gentlemen, I want to be clear about my expectations. This case will be handled according to standard procedures, with full transparency and appropriate consequences. My rank doesn't shield anyone from accountability, including me if I had violated procedures. She looked directly at each officer in turn. You will learn from this experience, and you will ensure it never happens again to any citizen under your authority. The community is watching, and they deserve to see that justice applies equally to everyone. The meeting ended with the officers facing the full weight of their misconduct. They had violated the constitutional rights of a fellow officer who had spent her career teaching them how to avoid exactly these violations. As Sarah left the conference room, she could hear Patricia Walsh quietly explaining to her clients that their best option was complete cooperation and acceptance of whatever disciplinary measures the department recommended. The receipt avalanche was complete. Every piece of evidence, every training record, every policy violation had been documented and presented through proper channels. The officers who had dismissed her as just another shoplifting suspect now understood they had confronted one of the department's most respected leaders in constitutional law enforcement. The immediate aftermath was clear. Their careers, their reputations, and their futures would be determined by how they responded to being held accountable by the very person they had wronged. By Wednesday afternoon, news of Captain Sarah Martinez's identity had leaked beyond the Internal Affairs conference room. The revelation spread through the police department like wildfire, reaching every precinct, every shift supervisor, and every officer who had watched the viral videos with casual interest. Detective Ray Collins was the first to confirm what many had suspected. After recognizing Sarah in the original footage, he had spent 2 days researching her background and cross-referencing her service record with the incident details. "That's our Captain Martinez," he told his partner during their coffee break. 15 years on the force, community policing expert, constitutional law instructor. And Johnson and Williams arrested her for shopping. The story reached Chief Peterson's office within hours, delivered by his pale-faced assistant, who had been monitoring social media trends and internal department communications. "Chief, we have a problem. The woman from the Nordstrom incident. She's one of ours. Captain Sarah Martinez, Downtown Division." Peterson, a 28-year veteran who had navigated countless departmental crises, felt his stomach drop. The viral videos had already generated negative publicity, but this revelation would transform a public relations problem into a full-scale institutional catastrophe. "Get me everything. Service records, training certifications, community commendations. I want to understand exactly who we're dealing with before this gets worse." The research revealed Sarah's extensive qualifications and made the officer's actions even more indefensible. Every document painted the same picture. A decorated captain with expertise in precisely the areas where Johnson and Williams had failed. Meanwhile, social media was exploding with the news. The original videos, viewed by hundreds of thousands, were being reshared with new context about Sarah's identity and qualifications. Marcus Thompson, the teenager who had live-streamed the original incident, posted an update that quickly went viral. "Y'all, that woman they arrested? She's a police captain. They literally arrested their own boss for shopping while black." The hashtag Captain Martinez began trending nationally within 6 hours. Comments flooded in from across the country, with people expressing outrage that even a decorated police officer could be subjected to racial profiling and false arrest. Local news stations picked up the story immediately. Channel 7's evening broadcast led with an exclusive segment titled, "Police Captain Falsely Arrested While Shopping." Anchor Rebecca Torres, who had tried to interview Sarah earlier, provided context that made the situation even more damaging. Captain Martinez has spent her career training officers to avoid exactly the kind of constitutional violations she experienced at Nordstrom. Sources within the department describe her as one of their most respected leaders in community policing. The report included excerpts from Sarah's training seminars, showing her teaching proper procedures to the same officers who had violated her rights. The irony was lost on no one. Community leaders who had worked with Sarah over the years began speaking out publicly. Reverend James Mitchell, whose congregation had hosted several of Sarah's community forums, called the incident a perfect example of how systemic racism affects everyone, regardless of their position or qualifications. Captain Martinez has been our strongest ally in building trust between police and the community, Mitchell told reporters. If someone with her credentials and reputation can be treated this way, what does that say about how regular citizens are treated? The political implications were immediate and severe. Mayor Patricia Collins called an emergency press conference for Thursday morning, knowing that her administration's credibility on police reform was hanging in the balance. City Councilwoman Janet Torres, who had witnessed part of the incident, provided a first-hand account that added political weight to the growing controversy. I watched Captain Martinez maintain her dignity and professionalism while being subjected to treatment that no citizen should experience. The fact that she's a police officer makes this both more ironic and more inexcusable. The police union found itself in an impossible position. Defending officers who had violated the rights of their own captain would be political suicide, but abandoning them completely would undermine their credibility with rank-and-file members. Union President Michael Davidson issued a carefully worded statement that satisfied no one. We support thorough investigation of all incidents involving police procedures. Every officer deserves due process, just as every citizen deserves constitutional protection. But privately, union leadership was furious with Johnson and Williams for creating an unwinnable situation. Their actions had given ammunition to police reform advocates and made it impossible to defend even legitimate police work. Sarah, meanwhile, maintained her professional silence, despite constant media requests. Her careful approach to public statements reflected years of experience in high-stakes situations where every word would be scrutinized and analyzed. She issued a single statement through the department's media relations office. I am cooperating fully with all investigations and have confidence that proper procedures will be followed. My focus remains on serving the community and ensuring this experience leads to positive changes in police training and accountability. The statement was masterfully crafted, professional, non-confrontational, but clearly establishing her expectation that real reforms would result from her experience. Behind the scenes, Sarah was working with her attorney to prepare for the formal internal affairs hearing scheduled for Friday. The evidence was overwhelming, but she knew that institutional pressure to minimize the damage could lead to inadequate consequences. They'll try to characterize this as an isolated incident, she told her lawyer. But the training records show these problems are systemic. Officers are learning proper procedures and then ignoring them when it matters. The attorney, Sarah Collins, no relation to Detective Collins, was a civil rights specialist who had handled dozens of police misconduct cases. She recognized that Sarah's case was unique in its potential for institutional change. Your position gives us leverage that civilian complainants don't have, Collins explained. You can't be dismissed as someone who doesn't understand police work. You literally wrote the training manual they violated. The revelation of Sarah's identity had also prompted other victims to come forward. Citizens who had experienced similar treatment but had been afraid to file complaints were now contacting the media and the Internal Affairs Division. Dorothy Chen, the retired teacher who had posted about the incident on social media, received dozens of messages from people sharing their own experiences with racial profiling by police. Captain Martinez gave people hope that their complaints would be taken seriously, Chen told reporters. Her courage is inspiring others to speak up about injustices they've been carrying alone. The cascade effect was exactly what police reform advocates had hoped for. Systemic problems being exposed through a single high-profile case that couldn't be buried or ignored. Federal attention was also escalating. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division announced they were monitoring the situation and would consider broader investigation if local authorities failed to address constitutional violations adequately. Assistant Attorney General Patricia Williams issued a statement that sent shockwaves through law enforcement. When police officers violate the constitutional rights of their own colleagues, it suggests training failures and cultural problems that may require federal intervention. By Thursday evening, the Nordstrom incident had transformed from a local news story into a national conversation about police accountability, racial bias, and institutional reform. Sarah's identity as a police captain had given the story credibility and staying power that typical misconduct cases lacked. The department faced a choice: conduct a transparent, thorough investigation that might expose deeper problems, or attempt damage control that would likely fail under intense public scrutiny. Chief Peterson, recognizing that his department's future credibility depended on handling this case properly, made a decision that surprised even veteran observers. "We will conduct the most transparent internal affairs investigation in this department's history," he announced at an impromptu press conference. Captain Martinez deserves nothing less, and the community deserves to see that accountability applies to everyone. The stage was set for Friday's formal hearing, a proceeding that would determine not just the fate of the officers involved, but the direction of police reform efforts throughout the region. Sarah's revelation as a police captain had changed everything, but the real test would be whether that knowledge translated into meaningful consequences and lasting change. By Wednesday afternoon, news of Captain Sarah Martinez's identity had leaked beyond the Internal Affairs conference room. The revelation spread through the police department like wildfire, reaching every precinct, every shift supervisor, and every officer who had watched the viral videos with casual interest. Detective Ray Collins was the first to confirm what many had suspected. After recognizing Sarah in the original footage, he had spent 2 days researching her background and cross-referencing her service record with the incident details. "That's our Captain Martinez," he told his partner during their coffee break. 15 years on the force, community policing expert, constitutional law instructor. And Johnson and Williams arrested her for shopping. The story reached Chief Peterson's office within hours, delivered by his pale-faced assistant who had been monitoring social media trends and internal department communications. "Chief, we have a problem. The woman from the Nordstrom incident, she's one of ours. Captain Sarah Martinez, Downtown Division." Peterson, a 28-year veteran who had navigated countless departmental crises, felt his stomach drop. The viral videos had already generated negative publicity, but this revelation would transform a public relations problem into a full-scale institutional catastrophe. "Get me everything: service records, training certifications, community commendations. I want to understand exactly who we're dealing with before this gets worse." The research revealed Sarah's extensive qualifications and made the officer's actions even more indefensible. Every document painted the same picture: a decorated captain with expertise in precisely the areas where Johnson and Williams had failed. Meanwhile, social media was exploding with the news. The original videos, viewed by hundreds of thousands, were being reshared with new context about Sarah's identity and qualifications. Marcus Thompson, the teenager who had live-streamed the original incident, posted an update that quickly went viral. "Y'all, that woman they arrested, she's a police captain. They literally arrested their own boss for shopping while black." The hashtag Captain Martinez began trending nationally within 6 hours. Comments flooded in from across the country, with people expressing outrage that even a decorated police officer could be subjected to racial profiling and false arrest. Local news stations picked up the story immediately. Channel 7's evening broadcast led with an exclusive segment titled "Police Captain Falsely Arrested While Shopping." Anchor Rebecca Torres, who had tried to interview Sarah earlier, provided context that made the situation even more damaging. Captain Martinez has spent her career training officers to avoid exactly the kind of constitutional violations she experienced at Nordstrom. Sources within the department describe her as one of their most respected leaders in community policing. The report included excerpts from Sarah's training seminars, showing her teaching proper procedures to the same officers who had violated her rights. The irony was lost on no one. Community leaders who had worked with Sarah over the years began speaking out publicly. Reverend James Mitchell, whose congregation had hosted several of Sarah's community forums, called the incident a perfect example of how systemic racism affects everyone, regardless of their position or qualifications. Captain Martinez has been our strongest ally in building trust between police and the community, Mitchell told reporters. If someone with her credentials and reputation can be treated this way, what does that say about how regular citizens are treated? The political implications were immediate and severe. Mayor Patricia Collins called an emergency press conference for Thursday morning, knowing that her administration's credibility on police reform was hanging in the balance. City Councilwoman Janet Torres, who had witnessed part of the incident, provided a first-hand account that added political weight to the growing controversy. I watched Captain Martinez maintain her dignity and professionalism while being subjected to treatment that no citizen should experience. The fact that she's a police officer makes this both more ironic and more inexcusable. The police union found itself in an impossible position. Defending officers who had violated the rights of their own captain would be political suicide. But abandoning them completely would undermine their credibility with rank-and-file members. Union President Michael Davidson issued a carefully worded statement that satisfied no one. We support thorough investigation of all incidents involving police procedures. Every officer deserves due process, just as every citizen deserves constitutional protection. But privately, Union leadership was furious with Johnson and Williams for creating an unwinnable situation. Their actions had given ammunition to police reform advocates and made it impossible to defend even legitimate police work. Sarah, meanwhile, maintained her professional silence despite constant media requests. Her careful approach to public statements reflected years of experience in high-stakes situations, where every word would be scrutinized and analyzed. She issued a single statement through the department's media relations office. I am cooperating fully with all investigations and have confidence that proper procedures will be followed. My focus remains on serving the community and ensuring this experience leads to positive changes in police training and accountability. The statement was masterfully crafted, professional, non-confrontational, but clearly establishing her expectation that real reforms would result from her experience. Behind the scenes, Sarah was working with her attorney to prepare for the formal internal affairs hearing scheduled for Friday. The evidence was overwhelming, but she knew that institutional pressure to minimize the damage could lead to inadequate consequences. They'll try to characterize this as an isolated incident, she told her lawyer. But the training records show these problems are systemic. Officers are learning proper procedures and then ignoring them when it matters. The attorney, Sarah Collins, no relation to Detective Collins, was a civil rights specialist who had handled dozens of police misconduct cases. She recognized that Sarah's case was unique in its potential for institutional change. Your position gives us leverage that civilian complainants don't have, Collins explained. You can't be dismissed as someone who doesn't understand police work. You literally wrote the training manual they violated. The revelation of Sarah's identity had also prompted other victims to come forward. Citizens who had experienced similar treatment but had been afraid to file complaints were now contacting the media and the Internal Affairs Division. Dorothy Chen, the retired teacher who had posted about the incident on social media, received dozens of messages from people sharing their own experiences with racial profiling by police. Captain Martinez gave people hope that their complaints would be taken seriously, Chen told reporters. Her courage is inspiring others to speak up about injustices they've been carrying alone. The cascade effect was exactly what police reform advocates had hoped for. Systemic problems being exposed through a single, high-profile case that couldn't be buried or ignored. Federal attention was also escalating. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division announced they were monitoring the situation and would consider broader investigation if local authorities failed to address constitutional violations adequately. Assistant Attorney General Patricia Williams issued a statement that sent shockwaves through law enforcement. When police officers violate the constitutional rights of their own colleagues, it suggests training failures and cultural problems that may require federal intervention. By Thursday evening, the Nordstrom incident had transformed from a local news story into a national conversation about police accountability, racial bias, and institutional reform. Sarah's identity as a police captain had given the story credibility and staying power that typical misconduct cases lacked. The department faced a choice: conduct a transparent, thorough investigation that might expose deeper problems, or attempt damage control that would likely fail under intense public scrutiny. Chief Peterson, recognizing that his department's future credibility depended on handling this case properly, made a decision that surprised even veteran observers. "We will conduct the most transparent internal affairs investigation in this department's history," he announced at an impromptu press conference. "Captain Martinez deserves nothing less, and the community deserves to see that accountability applies to everyone." The stage was set for Friday's formal hearing, a proceeding that would determine not just the fate of the officers involved, but the direction of police reform efforts throughout the region. Sarah's revelation as a police captain had changed everything. But the real test would be whether that knowledge translated into meaningful consequences and lasting change. Friday morning arrived with news trucks lining the street outside police headquarters, and protesters carrying signs demanding justice for Captain Martinez. The formal internal affairs hearing was closed to the public, but the intense media attention ensured that every decision would be scrutinized by thousands of interested observers. Sarah arrived precisely at 9 a.m., wearing her dress uniform for the first time since the incident. The dark blue fabric, polished brass buttons, and captain's insignia sent a clear message. She was here as a fellow officer, demanding accountability from colleagues who had betrayed their shared oath. Lieutenant Morrison had spent 3 days preparing for what he knew would be the most important hearing of his career. The evidence was overwhelming, the political pressure was intense, and the national attention meant that any appearance of favoritism or cover-up would destroy the department's credibility for years. The hearing room was packed with department brass, union representatives, and internal affairs investigators. Chief Peterson sat in the back, his presence indicating the institutional importance of the proceedings. This hearing will address complaint number IA-2024-0847, filed by Captain Sarah Martinez regarding constitutional violations during her detention at Nordstrom on March 15th, Morrison announced. All testimony will be recorded and subject to review by the district attorney's office. Officer Johnson entered looking haggard, accompanied by his union attorney. 3 days of knowing he had arrested a police captain had taken a visible toll. Officer Williams appeared more composed but clearly nervous. Sergeant Davis maintained his professional demeanor despite the obvious stress. Sarah's attorney, Sarah Collins, had spent the week preparing for a hearing that would likely set precedent for how police misconduct cases involving officer victims would be handled. The evidence will show that Captain Martinez was subjected to racial profiling, false detention, physical assault, and multiple constitutional violations by officers who ignored their training and failed to follow basic procedures, Collins announced in her opening statement. Morrison began with a review of the undisputed facts. Sarah's presence at Nordstrom, the store manager's accusations, the officer's response, and the eventual revelation of Sarah's identity. Security footage shows Captain Martinez engaged in normal shopping behavior for 47 minutes before any contact with store security. No evidence exists of theft, concealment, or suspicious activity. The first piece of evidence appeared on the hearing room monitors. Timestamp-coded security footage showing Sarah's entire visit to the jewelry department. Every movement was captured in high definition, creating an unbreakable record of her innocent behavior. Officer Johnson shifted uncomfortably as he watched himself on screen, seeing his aggressive posturing and failure to conduct an independent investigation. Morrison continued the evidence presentation. Store manager Wilson's initial complaint alleged theft without specifying any stolen items. Officers Johnson and Williams proceeded with detention based solely on unsubstantiated accusations. The radio communications came next, recordings of the dispatch calls that showed how quickly the situation escalated from a simple shoplifting complaint to a full arrest scenario. Sarah's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional. "I understand your concerns, but you don't have legal authority to detain me or search my personal property without reasonable suspicion based on observed criminal activity." The contrast was stark. While officers stumbled through improper procedures, Sarah provided textbook responses that demonstrated her superior knowledge of constitutional law. Morrison pulled up Sarah's training records on the main monitor. Captain Martinez has conducted 73 training seminars on constitutional law enforcement. Officer Johnson attended her workshop on Fourth Amendment protections just 8 months ago. Johnson's face went red as the training attendance records appeared on screen. He had been personally trained by Sarah on exactly the procedures he had violated during her detention. The union attorney attempted damage control. "Lieutenant Morrison, my clients were responding to what appeared to be a legitimate complaint from store management. They had no reason to question. They had every reason to question," Sarah interrupted, speaking directly to the officers for the first time. "Constitutional protections don't disappear because a store manager makes accusations. Your training covered this explicitly." Morrison continued with the physical evidence. Photos of bruises on Sarah's arms from the struggle with Wilson and Officer Johnson's attempt to seize her phone. The evidence shows that store manager Wilson initiated physical contact by grabbing Captain Martinez's purse. Officer Johnson then escalated by attempting to seize her phone without warrant or probable cause. The medical documentation was damning. Sarah had been examined by a police physician who documented multiple bruises consistent with the physical altercation described in her complaint. Chief Peterson was taking notes from his position in the back of the room, clearly recognizing the liability exposure the department faced from the documented injuries. Morrison addressed the constitutional violations directly. Officers failed to establish probable cause, conducted an unlawful detention, permitted physical assault by a civilian, and attempted illegal seizure of personal property. Each violation was covered in mandatory training that all 3 officers completed within the past year. The training materials appeared on screen. PowerPoint slides from Sarah's own presentations about proper procedures and constitutional protections. The irony was crushing. She had literally taught them how to avoid violating her own rights. Officer Williams finally found his voice. "Lieutenant Morrison, I recognize that mistakes were made. Captain Martinez, I want to apologize for—" Sarah held up her hand, stopping his apology. "Officer Williams, I don't want apologies. I want assurance that this will never happen to another citizen. I want evidence that you understand why these procedures exist and why they matter." Morrison consulted his final set of documents, recommendations from the District Attorney's Office and the Federal Civil Rights Division. The District Attorney has concluded that constitutional violations occurred, but will not pursue criminal charges pending satisfactory resolution through departmental discipline. However, federal authorities reserve the right to intervene if local action is inadequate. The implicit threat was clear. Handle this properly, or face federal investigation of the entire department. Sarah stood to deliver her victim impact statement, her uniform lending additional weight to her words. Gentlemen, I have spent 15 years teaching officers to treat every citizen with dignity and respect. I have conducted training on exactly the constitutional violations I experienced. I have worked to build trust between police and the community. She looked directly at each officer in turn. Your actions that day undermined years of community building and damaged the reputation of every officer who does their job properly. But more importantly, you violated the oath we all took to protect and serve everyone equally. Her statement was personal yet professional, holding them accountable while maintaining focus on institutional improvement rather than personal revenge. Morrison announced the hearing's conclusion with recommendations that would be reviewed by Chief Peterson and the Civilian Oversight Board. This case demonstrates systemic failures in training application and constitutional awareness. Recommendations include mandatory retraining for all officers involved, policy reviews, and enhanced oversight of citizen complaints. The formal discipline would be announced within 48 hours, but everyone in the room understood that careers had been forever changed by their encounter with Captain Sarah Martinez. As the hearing ended, Sarah gathered her materials with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the ordeal. She had used the system properly, presented overwhelming evidence, and demanded accountability through appropriate channels. The officers who had dismissed her as just another shoplifting suspect now understood they had confronted one of their department's most respected leaders and lost decisively in the battle for institutional credibility and public trust. The showdown was complete. Justice would be served, policies would be changed, and the community would see that accountability could work when victims had the knowledge and determination to demand it. But as Sarah left the hearing room, she knew the real test would be whether these lessons lasted beyond the media attention and created lasting change in how officers treated all citizens, regardless of their rank or status. Monday morning brought the official announcement that had been anticipated by the entire police department and the community watching from afar. Chief Peterson stood at the podium in the main briefing room, surrounded by reporters and department personnel, holding a document that would determine the immediate future of 3 officers and set precedent for accountability cases. After thorough review of Internal Affairs Case IA 2024-0847, Peterson announced, his voice carrying the weight of institutional responsibility. The following disciplinary actions are effective immediately. Officer Johnson is suspended without pay for 90 days, with mandatory retraining in constitutional law and racial bias recognition. Officer Williams receives 60 days suspension and similar retraining requirements. Sergeant Davis faces 30 days suspension and additional supervisory training. The penalties were more severe than typical for first-time violations, reflecting both the public attention and the fact that they had violated the rights of a fellow officer. But Sarah, watching from her office, recognized that these were preliminary measures, enough to satisfy immediate demands for accountability, while leaving room for additional consequences if federal authorities remained unsatisfied. The announcement continued with policy changes that Sarah had specifically requested during her victim impact statement. Effective immediately, all officers will undergo mandatory refresher training on Fourth Amendment protections and racial bias recognition. Store detention policies will be reviewed, and new protocols established for responding to shoplifting complaints. These changes represented progress, but Sarah understood that policy revisions were only meaningful if they translated into different behavior during actual encounters with citizens. The real test would come in future interactions that weren't being recorded by dozens of witnesses. Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Maya, who was following the news coverage from her college campus. "Mom, I saw the announcement. Are you okay? Coming home this weekend to celebrate your graduation gift shopping success?" The message brought Sarah's first genuine smile in over a week. Maya's humor and support had sustained her through the most difficult moments of the ordeal. But it also reminded her that her family had been unwilling participants in a very public controversy. Sarah returned to her regular duties with mixed feelings. The stack of incident reports on her desk, the community meetings on her calendar, the training seminars she was scheduled to lead, all seemed both familiar and strange after experiencing the system from the victim's perspective. Her colleagues treated her differently now. Some offered support and admiration for her courage in pursuing accountability. Others maintained professional distance, possibly uncomfortable with the precedent her case had set for officer-on-officer complaints. Detective Collins knocked on her office door, carrying coffee and a respectful expression. "Captain, wanted to check how you're settling back in. Also wanted to say, what you did took guts. The whole department needed to see that accountability works both ways." Sarah appreciated the support, but she was also aware that Collins' respect came partly from her rank and position. She wondered if he would have been equally supportive of a civilian complainant pursuing the same case. "Collins, I want you to understand something important. I didn't file that complaint because I'm a police officer. I filed it because every citizen deserves constitutional protection. The badge doesn't make my rights more important than anyone else's." Collins nodded, but Sarah could see he was still processing the implications. The case had forced every officer to confront uncomfortable questions about how their assumptions and biases affected their interactions with the public. Her computer chimed with a priority email from the mayor's office, an invitation to join a task force on police community relations that would be announced the following week. The appointment was clearly intended to demonstrate the city's commitment to reform, while capitalizing on Sarah's credibility with both law enforcement and civil rights advocates. Sarah studied the invitation carefully. Participating would give her influence over policy changes, but it would also make her a political symbol, rather than simply a police officer doing her job. The role came with opportunities and risks she was still evaluating. A second email arrived from an unexpected source, the Nordstrom corporate headquarters. The subject line read, "Confidential settlement discussion, time sensitive." The message was brief and professionally worded, but the implications were significant. "Captain Martinez, we would appreciate the opportunity to discuss resolution of any outstanding concerns regarding your recent experience at our store. Our legal team is available at your convenience." Sarah deleted the email without responding. Corporate attempts to buy her silence had started within hours of the incident going viral, but they had intensified after her identity became public. The offers were substantial, enough to make most people consider settling quietly. But Sarah's goals extended far beyond personal compensation. Her desk phone rang with a call from Assistant District Attorney Patricia Chen, whose preliminary review had helped pressure the department toward appropriate discipline. "Captain Martinez, wanted to update you on our ongoing review. We're expanding the investigation to include patterns of misconduct at retail establishments throughout the city. Your case appears to be part of a larger systemic issue." The news was both encouraging and concerning. Broader investigation meant more comprehensive reform, but it also suggested that her experience was far from unique. How many other citizens had faced similar treatment without her knowledge and resources to fight back? Chen continued, "We're also looking into the corporate relationships between major retailers and local law enforcement. Some of the connections we're finding are troubling." She couldn't provide details during an active investigation, but the implication was clear. The problems went deeper than individual officer bias or store manager prejudice. There might be institutional relationships that encouraged or enabled discriminatory enforcement. Sarah's computer chimed again, this time with an encrypted message from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "Evidence you need to see." She opened the message cautiously, finding a single line of text. "Security footage from March 15th exists that wasn't turned over to Internal Affairs. Parking garage camera captured conversation between store manager Wilson and someone who arrived 30 minutes before your detention. Meet if interested. The message included no signature, no contact information, just a burner phone number and a warning. Others don't want this information public. Sarah stared at the screen, recognizing that someone was offering evidence that could potentially change everything about her case. But anonymous tips were always dangerous, especially when they suggested conspiracy beyond what had already been established. Her office door opened again. This time it was her sister Carmen, holding flowers and wearing an expression of mixed pride and concern. "Sarah, I brought you something to brighten up this place. But honestly, I'm worried about you. All this media attention, the investigation, the stress, when does it end?" It was a fair question that Sarah had been avoiding. The formal case was resolved, but the broader implications would continue indefinitely. Her name was now permanently associated with police accountability, which created both opportunities and risks for her future career. "Carmen, I can't predict when this ends, but I can control whether it leads to positive change or just becomes another news cycle that everyone forgets." Her sister nodded but clearly remained worried. "Maya's coming home this weekend. She wants to celebrate, but she's also scared about the attention you're getting. Death threats, crazy messages on social media. Is it worth it?" The question hit harder than Sarah expected. Fighting for justice and accountability had costs beyond her own career. Her family was paying a price for her decision to pursue the complaint rather than accepting quiet settlement offers. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed with yet another message, this one from Officer Williams, who had been suspended that morning. "Captain Martinez, I know I have no right to ask for your time, but I would appreciate the chance to speak with you personally. Not about the case, that's closed. About how to be better, how to make sure this never happens again." The message surprised Sarah. Most officers faced with discipline became defensive or angry. Williams seemed genuinely interested in learning from his mistakes. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah found herself reviewing the investigation files one final time. The evidence was comprehensive, the accountability measures were appropriate, and the policy changes were meaningful. By any objective measure, justice had been served. But the anonymous message about missing security footage nagged at her. If there was evidence that hadn't been disclosed, if there were deeper conspiracies or institutional problems, then the case might be far from over. She locked the investigation files in her desk drawer and prepared to leave for the day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about how far to pursue the broader implications of her experience. Her phone rang one final time as she gathered her belongings. The caller ID showed Chief Peterson's direct line. "Sarah, wanted to touch base about your transition back to regular duties. How are you feeling about everything?" "Cautiously optimistic, Chief. The disciplinary actions were appropriate, and the policy changes are a good start." Peterson paused before continuing. "There's something else we need to discuss. Federal authorities are asking more questions about department practices. They may want to interview you again as part of a broader investigation." The conversation confirmed what Sarah had suspected. Her case had opened doors that led to much larger questions about police accountability and institutional bias. What had started as a simple shopping trip was becoming a catalyst for systemic reform. As Sarah drove home that evening, she reflected on the week's developments. Justice had been served in her individual case, but the anonymous message about missing evidence suggested there were still secrets to uncover. Her phone lit up with one final notification, a missed call from the burner number mentioned in the encrypted email. The caller had left no message, but the timing felt deliberate. Sarah pulled into her driveway, noting the unmarked car parked across the street that had been there for 3 days. Whether it represented protection or surveillance remained unclear, but its presence indicated that someone considered her case far from closed. Inside her house, she found an envelope that had been slipped under her door. No postmark, no return address, just her name written in block letters across expensive stationery. The envelope contained a single photograph, security camera footage, showing store manager Wilson in conversation with a man in a suit 30 minutes before Sarah had entered Nordstrom. The man's face was partially obscured, but his badge was clearly visible. He was a police officer who hadn't been part of the official response team.